Hold on, Crystal, don't. It's preparing.
Okay. All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Real Talk. My name is Crystal Patrick. I'm your host today. And today's Real Talk is about grief during a pandemic. Real Talk, Voicing the Margins, is a series of curated live conversations on issues and topics of critical import to marginalized communities, including but not limited to people of color, LGBTQIA+, and economically disadvantaged citizens. Providing a voice and platform for often voiceless people is at the heart of the series. Real Talk, Voicing the Margins is a partnership with the Woody Guthrie Center, the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, Folk Alliance International, Black Wall Street Times, and Tri-City Collective. Whew, got all that out. During the pandemic, our Real Talk series, Our Real Talk series is platformed on Facebook Live, and in time will return to live audiences at the Woody Guthrie Center. At this time, we would like to share Woody Guthrie's land acknowledgement. In the centennial year of the Tulsa Race Massacre, the Woody Guthrie Center acknowledges the land on which we gather is the home of the Osage, Cherokee, and Muskogee Creek Nations, as well as being the ancestral home of the Caddo and numerous other tribes before the forced removal. Their honor and blood inform our spirit and our work. We also acknowledge the Black Americans who lost life, property, and generational wealth in the 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. Their honor and blood inform our spirit and our work. I would like to go ahead and introduce our three panelists today, our three friends today. This is like a conversation in the living room, guys. So we're just going to kind of relax, breathe. You know, we have a week before Christmas and then we jump into 2022. I just want to thank you guys for coming on and talking about what we're going to talk about today. Our first panelist is Grace Harrington. Grace is a full-time software sales rep with her hands in multiple passion projects at all times. She started an online community and support group for women who are married to men from Saudi Arabia. She has been living the single mom life since August 2020, when her husband had to go back to Saudi to await a green card. She moved to Tulsa through the Tulsa Remote Program from the DMV, but spent most of her adult life in Utah. Brianna Brown. Miss Brianna Brown is an ORU graduate with a BS in biology and a minor in psychology. She currently serves as a mental health advocate for youth and young adults through Family Children's Services. And last but not least is Baxter, AKA Negro Spiritual, AKA You Shall Not Say His First Name. He is a native Tulsan and community activist. He is founder of the local nonprofit Racism Stinks, which is dedicated to training and educating strong allies in the push for equity and equality, not just in Tulsa, but across the country. The sudden loss of his father during the pandemic was a traumatic experience for his family. Thank you all for joining us. So our topic today is already touched on about grief. The holidays are a joyous time for many, as this is the time of the year when people enjoy friends and family. For just as many, though, this season brings about many emotions, one of which is grief. The onset of the pandemic over 2 years ago has caused us as a society to reimagine not only how we display grief, but also how we share and cope with it. Because of this global pandemic, every single person on this earth has experienced some type of loss, such as losing a loved one through death or separation, but also because of COVID restrictions, people have experienced loss through jobs, traditions normally observed, you name it. Everything has been impacted in our life. Today, our conversation is going to be centered around that loss and grief and how it's manifested in unconventional ways during the pandemic, but we will also talk about what gives us hope and what keeps us moving forward. Woo! Got all my papers out of the way. Well, guys, thanks for coming, like I said, and thank you for coming to share your stories. We all know Christmas is a week away, and one of the reasons why Tri-City Collective partnership with the Woody Guthrie Center wanted to talk about grief is because it seems like during the holiday season, grief and loss is compounded because you have all the memories and all the different things that that come up anyway around the holidays, but have just been compounded by loss. So I'd like to start with Baxter. Baxter, you experienced the loss of a loved one. Do you want to tell a little bit about your story?
October 29th, 2020, my father passed away. Big, big presence in the family, it's always laughing, singing, dancing. And, he was the glue for the entire family, not just our immediate family at home here in Tulsa, but our extended family in DMV, in Maryland, and in Minnesota, California, and back home in Liberia, where my family is from. My dad was an immigrant who came here in 1977, and he met my mom here in Tulsa, who also immigrated from Liberia. And so they have a true American dream type story. And losing, that foundational piece of our story, being my dad and the hard work that he put through to build for our family to have, the first foundations of legacy and generational wealth here in America was very trying, and so grief process, I don't think there's ever an end to it. When you have the loss of somebody that you love, there's an end, but your coping kind of grows. Your coping grows, and you get to become stronger in the understanding that you are still here in this realm by, without the person that you're missing, but at the same time, their teachings, their words, the laughter y'all shared, the good times you had with that person lives, within your heart and in your spirit.
Very, very, very true. Just their presence. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
They're the essence of who they are. Thank you for sharing that. Grace, your story is a little bit different. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, sure. So I have been experiencing just over the last year and a half almost now, just kind of this roller coaster of, some days are good. Some days I'm just totally in my feels, since my husband had to go back to his home country. My husband, I met him back in 2014 while he was a student studying in the States. We got married in 2018, had our beautiful child the next year. And once he graduated in the summer of 2019, we applied for his green card. We were supposed to, do our first, what they call biometrics, your fingerprints and everything for that at the end of February of 2020. And then all the immigration offices closed down and everything was just, immigration wasn't moving forward. It was at a standstill for a good 7-8 months. Nothing was happening. I watched my, happy, wonderful husband just kind of spiral into this mental space of just not being someone any of us even recognized, deep depression, which ultimately led to him making the decision, I have to go home to get some of these documents that they're saying that we need. I don't have a birth certificate. I've never been issued one. His family is really working against him immigrating here, so they weren't willing to help him get those things. And he made the decision to go back because he was facing, I either do this and abandon my case, or I could face deportation. And that holds about a 10-year bar on reentry of any kind into the States. And so that was really hard. He made that decision on his own. I was out of town and came home and my husband was gone. Didn't really know what was going on. And it's just, like I said, that all happened in August of last year of 2020. And it's just kind of been this, we started doing, virtual couples therapy. He does his own, I do my own. And I think it's really helped us. I think once he is able to be back here, we'll be stronger than we've ever been before. But it's definitely just been this, some days I'm just I can talk about it and I'm great. Other days I'm just absolutely numb to any kind of feeling about it because it's just like, this is my life. And then other days, you're sitting there and it's 11 o'clock at night, baby's in bed, and you're just like, I just miss my person being here. So yeah, it's definitely a different type of loss, but going into another holiday without him, it's, we thought he was going to be able to be here and then found out a couple weeks ago that he's not. So that was kind of a low blow. But things happen, and, we've got his application in again, and hopefully he'll be here for next Christmas.
Hey, I'm going to circle back because I have a question pertaining to what you just said, but I wanted to bring Miss Brianna into the conversation. Grace, you talked about therapy, and Brianna, you are a mental health advocate for youth and young adults. So could you talk about that? What are the primary ages that you serve? And I'll just let you go ahead and speak.
So I serve from 4 to 18, and I do like special needs, kiddos without special needs. The range for that is broad.
How long have you been in your position? Were you in your position like at what you do right now? Were you in it before the pandemic started, or did you come on during? When did you begin your work?
The position that I'm in now, I came on during the pandemic, but I did something similar at the very beginning, but it was with adults instead of children.
Okay. So what have you, since you work with children and high school students, let's talk, I didn't know you work with babies that small. So that's something, whoa, totally different. But just even thinking about young high school, middle school students that are about to go into the world, what are some of the things that you see? How are they coping with the loss of socialization and other things that young people need for their development and becoming effective, partakers in society?
Yeah. When I think of mental health, especially in like a school setting with the demographic that I service, I think of like herd immunity. And I know when I say that, that could be like vaccines, medicine, diseases, things like that. Like we are a country that is strong about herd immunity. And so I tie that into kind of like mental health. Kiddos that have been virtual and not been in in-person school and are at home during this pandemic, like they have their own set of, level of development in which they grow when it comes to mental health. And the changes that I've seen is just, there's more impulse controls because we went from having everything at the tip of our fingers, being able to go to prom, being able to go to sports games, being able to visit like our friends and things like that outside of school, being around other kids that look like us in person, to having to stay at home, having to do things virtually, missing out on those things. And so when you don't have a place or an environment where you're around other people that may be in your grade, that may be in your age group, where you're learning the same things and you're experiencing some of the same experiences, whether it be at school, you lack those things. You're set back. And what you described earlier about how kids could be in 9th grade and they're behaving like a seventh grader, it's because they're not around kids that share the same things as they do, and they're not pushing each other or feeding off of each other to learn.
So that loss of socialization has really had a dire impact on the youth and the young adults. I want to go back to, because I lost my father as well during the pandemic in 2020, April 17, 2020, actually, at 1:17 p.m. No, 1:40 p.m. And one of the things that I still feel like I don't feel like I've been able to fully close that chapter of losing my dad, because we did not have a funeral for him because we were like hot in the middle of, COVID. And also when we got around to the summertime, we were hearing all these different, once the cold's going to kill it or the heat's going to kill it. So we had all these expectations in the summer of 2020 that maybe there was starting to be a little handle on it. And so our family was like thinking about having a memorial for him, but then the cases started rising again. And then we ultimately decided against, because, you know, the media was reporting all kind of crazy things, like somebody going to a wedding and like 12 people dying from, you know, a wedding. So my stepmother just decided against it, in which I was in agreement with that. And so like just being able to like grieve like the loss of somebody that you love, I feel like we're in a new space and time where it's okay to rewrite what grief looks like and how to cope with it, rewrite what healing looks like. For one, sometimes we don't have a choice. We have to figure out, you know, a path to move forward. And I think I'm still on that. Baxter, can you relate to any of what I just said? I know you had a funeral for your father, but has COVID, like in the restrictions of COVID, did it impact, like, was he sick in the hospital? Like, did anything like that happen to where things that were a certain way before the pandemic and even a hospitalization, how was it different even going to visit him in the hospital?
So my father was sick. He was in Denver, Colorado. I think it was University of Denver Hospital, if I'm not mistaken. And their restrictions were a little bit more relaxed than in Oklahoma. And it was later during the year. It was, you know, on the second half of the year, and people were, you know, understanding COVID a little bit better. He was only allowed one person in the room with him when he was, you know, still conscious and cognizant and can, you know, communicate and everything, and still cracking jokes, laying down there on his deathbed. We were just trying to, you know, like rotate family members in and out, people who flew down, people flew in from Texas, people flew in from Minnesota, Maryland, all over, North Carolina, you know, and they were gracious enough to give them, you know, time to come, and they would, you know, scan everybody, temperature check and all of those things. We were able to transport him to Tulsa in the last few days before his passing. Nobody was allowed except my mom to go into the room. And then on the last day, when the doctors knew that, like, well, you guys have an hour at best to come say your final goodbyes. And so they just let us pile in there because they just felt like, you know, we're not gonna hold you back. And so, you know, but I know other people suffered loss and weren't able to visit at all. And it's been a devastating thing for everybody who had to go visit somebody or wasn't allowed to visit somebody in a hospital, or even got to barely make their way through there and see them. And so I can't remember, you know, even what the question was, because I just went back to that place.
Yeah.
And so
You answered it. It reminded me of my own experience with, I totally forgot. When my father passed away, we, the nurse, my stepmother, thankfully was able to go up into the room, and the nurses at St. John's here in Tulsa, shout out to St. John's. They took such great care of my dad. One of the nurses brought down an iPad. So if you imagine, Brianna, and this question is going to be posed towards you again, as a mental health advocate, you know, when you have people who are, you know, kids and young adults who are not able to go physically and say goodbye to someone or go be with a loved one, anybody, Grace, anybody can jump into, this is a very, you know, popcorn style, not being able to go sit with as a family unit, go into the hospital room together and bring all that energy and that love together. I mean, Brianna, what kind of impact do you think that would make on, you know, young adults and teenagers? Because even myself as a fully grown woman, that was I was just thankful I was able to say goodbye through an iPad. But the people who cannot even be with their loved ones by their side, as a young person, like have you seen any of that play out with any of your clients where they weren't able to say goodbye to someone? And if so, what kind of recourse or help did you provide for them?
I have, and I think I've seen it look different because with smaller kiddos, their frontal cortex, their frontal lobe, it's not fully developed. And so with the kids that I work with specifically, they sometimes lack the ability to sometimes empathize. And I know that gets into a lot of therapy. But going over like social skills and going over like coping skills and things that trigger them, like we have to relearn all those things. And so most of the time it's for them, it's harder for them to process that. And we'll do things like we'll write a letter to them, or I'll have them describe to me some of the things that they remember, like some of their best memories, at least keep a positive image in which they remember a lot about them, so that way they can carry that. But for the most part, the demographic that I work with, they don't have that ability to express those feelings, and then we spend a lot of time working on feeling those things.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I think adults, even as an adult, that's something that some skills I can put in place. And speaking of children, Grace, you have a beautiful little girl. I like to call her Miss Thang.
It's all the things.
Yeah, she's very strong-willed. She's a blessing. Strong-willed children are definitely leaders. But just like, how are you helping? I don't even know. How do you go about being a mom, trying to, you know what I mean, build that connection with the baby girl and daddy virtually?
So it's a process. I remember, we were living in Alexandria right outside of DC when everything happened. And like, he was leaving the country as we were flying in, like our flights were like just barely passing each other. I'm flying, her and I flew back in from Utah, and we come back home to the apartment, and she's just like, Baba, like he had his room where it was like, that was kind of his, he's Muslim. So that was like where he would go and pray and like read Quran and like do his thing and whatever.
His man cave.
Exactly. It was his man cave. And very quickly, like within the first couple of hours of being back, I was like, I can't have you here. Fortunately, my parents live, 2 hours south of where we were on the Maryland side. So girl, I was paying through the nose for rent in Alexandria.
Right.
After my husband left, like we were never there. She was never there because it was so confusing to her, because everything, especially since like we moved there literally 3 weeks before all the lockdowns happened. So all she knew was, this is where my family belongs. Like, she had no memories of anybody else being in that home. And like, I was working out of the home. So it was just her and her dad. And since then, it was really hard in the beginning after he left to determine, how do we handle this? Do we just cut off all communication? Do we like hide pictures of him? It was hard to know. And so the first few months that he was gone, it wasn't until about Christmas of last year. Like I said, he left in August. It wasn't until about Christmas that I felt comfortable allowing him to have conversations with him. And I had to work through some things. There were some trust issues with him leaving the way he did. And so I was like, I need to trust you before I can allow you that with her. And he understood. And since then, it's been a lot of, FaceTiming with him, talking about, this is Baba, but it is confusing because, she sees other friends and she's like, oh, daddy. And it's like, no, that's Tigi's dad, or like, oh, daddy. No, that's Richard's dad. Like it's a confusing concept to her now of like, what is a dad?
Right.
She just sees all of her friends like daddy. And so it's like any man who's like with a child, she's like, oh, daddy. And I'm like,
yeah,
no. Like she understands now, like, this man is my Baba, like that's Arabic for dad. She's like, this is Baba, this is my daddy. But it's, and that's probably something that, Brianna could talk more about, because it's something I'm still like, I don't know how to break that of her, of understanding this is your daddy. We call him Baba. Those are not your daddies. Those are your friends' daddies.
Right.
But it's been interesting. I do feel like, Millie and I, we moved to Tulsa in April, and I feel like the community that we have in Tulsa very quickly, like, has been a real village with her. I'll be walking around the co-working space and how's Millie? How's Minnie Grace? How's she? Like, people love her in a way that outside of our family in the DC area, like, we didn't have that. And so it's fortunately being able to cope for both of us has been really, I think, a lot easier in Tulsa than it was in DC, even though we had family nearby. We have a very lively life in Tulsa.
Yeah, that's awesome. Baxter, dang, I just forgot the question I was about to ask you. Oh, wow. Anyway, sorry about that, guys. Going back to the children really quickly, because I'm just so interested in, like, just because of everything that has changed in the world in the last, couple of years, 3 years, not just with the pandemic, but with everything, with, technology just exploding and all the different things. Brianna, do kids still have empathy?
Yes, they do. They do. They do. And it's, I don't want to necessarily say that like all the kids that I work with lack that. It's more so in like my extreme cases, which are very few, they lack that. And, they have other things that help them, other professionals that help them. But just children in general, like what they're learning at home, what they're learning at school, like the way that they learn to display those different emotions. Like when they get upset, for an example, a kid that may be frustrated, a 5-year-old, they don't know the word for frustrated. And so at home, if they see mom and dad being frustrated and the way that they display frustration is throwing things, well, guess what? You're going to have a kid that's going to be throwing things.
Yeah.
And so with the pandemic, now adults are having to sit with themselves and sit in those emotions and feel what they feel, because they're not going to work. They're not going out socializing with friends. They're at home. And for some people, at home is like that safe place and safe space. And that is where a lot of those emotions that sometimes adults haven't even had a chance to master or communicate properly. And then that shows in with the kids.
Right.
That's literally trickled down into the children.
Right. It's about, we're modeling, people like to complain about the generation below them. It's just like, it's a direct reflection of the generation. It's the truth, the good and the bad. We like to take credit for the good, but the bad, we're like, that's not me. She got that from her daddy, because that ain't, that type of situation. But I want to bring this back around to Baxter. Baxter, how have you channeled, how have you channeled that emotion? Because, we know each other personally. And I know that like your father was your best friend. How have you channeled, taken that emotion and as a daily practice and used it in your life to drive you?
One thing I think that we have to really touch on or consider or throw in the mix, I should say, is that we can't leave out, is that we talked about, especially me and Grace talked about personal grief of a separation or loss that we have. And we all were going through a collective grief from the pandemic being, so that's like double, right? We have the pandemic on top of these personal situations, the pandemic making it where we can't connect with people. You can't go to the grocery store, you can't do this, can't do that. And then it got even worse with Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd, and all. That's another layer of grief, on top of personal, then pandemic, then racial or racism. It's a lot. It was a lot, you know what I mean? And I think that it would be remiss to not, include all of that in the 2020 conversation of grief that we had to deal with. And so dealing with all of that, for me, I just had to keep, if you're on a bike, if you're riding a bike and you're riding along, if I just decide I'm gonna stop and keep my feet on the pedals, I'm gonna fall off. It's not gonna happen. You gotta put one foot down, balance yourself. And we gotta do that from time to time. Hold on, let me take a stop, put my foot down, catch a breath, balance myself. But I had to keep going. I had to keep going on this bicycle of my journey, my movement. And if I would have stopped and said, well, I'm just gonna stop and sit in this grief for how long, I felt like I didn't know if I would ever come out of it. And so I just had to keep pedaling. I couldn't, and then, my mother dealing with, she losing her best friend, the person she's been with, created a life with, 40 years of her life, majority of her life was with this person, and so for him to get sick and we lose him in 60 days, it's a lot. He just retired, just paid off their house, and they had plans of all this stuff they're gonna do when they come back. They went to Denver, since we're getting real personal, telling everything. They went to Denver. My sister had a surgery. She lives in Denver. She's a flight attendant. And she was having a procedure done, and they was going to support her. And while they're there to support her, he falls gravely ill and is in the hospital for 2 months, and then we lose him. And so I just had to keep going, and not let up. I couldn't let up, and I did that mainly for 2 reasons: myself, and so allow my mom the opportunity to break down as much as she needed to, and I can be there to help her through the breakdown, to help the family through the breakdown, because while trying to be strong, it's like a facade in most aspects. It's a fake strength that you have to keep putting on. That's the fake it till you make it part. You're gonna fake like you're strong until you actually build this strength up. And so that's what I had to do, just keep pedaling.
Thank you. And that analogy, did you make that up?
I don't have a script.
I like that. Seriously, because on a bike, you do have to stay in motion. And that's kind of like a great analogy for life. It's okay to slow down, rest for a little bit, but you hop back on and keep going. But if you just go to a dead stop, you're going to fall over. And that was a great analogy. And Grace, I was like, oh, I'm going to ask Grace this. That's why I wasn't doing my active listening. But that was really good, Baxter. Grace, you said that you found a community here in Tulsa, which I agree. Tulsa really does have some really good people. Y'all agree, warm people, some of the kindest people I think, happen to be in Tulsa. You found that community to kind of help, sustain you and hold you up. Wow. Sorry, y'all. I didn't think I was going to get emotional. I'm not going to get emotional. You found a community to help sustain you and hold you up and your daughter up. Do you feel do you agree with Baxter, when it comes to loss, and you haven't physically lost your husband in the sense of he's still here, he's in another country, but do you kind of feel a lot the same as Baxter when he just said that, you just have to keep going? What is your drive? One of his drives was, being strong for his mother and his family. But what has been your drive to get up every day? I'm sure there are days where you're just can I lay in bed for a week, and close all the curtains? But what's the motivation for you to get up and keep going?
Yeah, I mean, obviously Millie, my daughter, biggest motivator out there. I also think, having these different passion projects where it's not only am I relying on myself, my husband's relying on me, my child's relying on me, but I've got, people within my community in Tulsa, people within the community that I've built for like the Saudi wives and like that support group who like, I have to be strong for my family, for these other people, for my community. Whether that's again, the Tulsa community or the Saudi wives, you know, we've got about 200 women all over the world. And, you know, there's some days where it's like, you know, I'll wake up to messages in my inbox from girls who are like, so I need to escape Saudi Arabia. What do I do? And I'm like, wow, ooh, girl. Like, and so there's, you know, I'm working on getting some legislation to help with these women, you know, help them be able to come back, help them fight their, you know, custody battles without facing potential extradition orders and things like that. So for me, you know, beyond just like my child and that obvious piece, also just having this community of people who I love, they love me, it's very apparent, but then having these projects and things that I'm passionate about, it makes it to where just getting through the day, you know, people are always like, girl, you are always on the move. And I'm like, that's what I have to do though. Because if I sit down, you know, Sundays are usually, you know, they arrest for me kind of deal. Those are my hardest days because I'm just sitting there in my feels. But if I'm just like, go, 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 like do this, do that, then I can kind of, you know, get more of that numb space of the emotions.
Now, well, all three of you all, because Baxter, he was talking, all three of you are talking about ultimately service to others, like in the midst of like grieving and loss. Baxter, you definitely in service to your family. You serve in a community of women who like have no recourse in their home country. And Brianna, going to, obviously you're a servant, you are serving, you know, this very important demographic, you know, of children who, you know, if I can venture to say probably many of them belong to like the BIPOC communities, probably, you know, I don't know. But Brianna, my question to you is, how do you keep, when are dealing with kids, young kids and teenagers who their worldview is very limited in the sense that they don't have like necessarily age and experience, you know, like teenagers and young adults, like you can't see, it's hard for you to see outside of yourself and your immediate needs. That's just a normal part of development. When they're dealing with like the different things that they have lost, whether it's a loved one, the ability to go socialize with friends, the ability to go to school. And I know with teenagers, a lot of times they think the world is literally ending. How do you encourage, you know, like literally they feel like they cannot go on, like things are just so like heavy? What do you do to encourage those kids to do what Baxter and Grace just said? Stay pedaling, you're on that bike, it's okay to take a rest, but hop back on and keep going, like Grace, you know, like keep going, you know, you serve other people. What are some of the things that you give teenagers and young adults in order to motivate them to keep going and keep pushing through?
I think we have, humans in general, we just have so much resilience. And I think that even with the specific people that I work with, they're way stronger than, you know, they appear to be. Mm-hmm. And we're relational beings. We are meant to be in relationships, developing relationships, constantly nurturing relationships. And so with the clients that I service, I try to focus on, I try to meet them where they're at. And then we build from there. Mm-hmm. Because if I'm trying to bring a child that does not have the specific social skills, or, you know, they're experiencing one hard thing after the other, and I expect to put them at a level where someone who may have not dealt with those specific hard things, and a child that may have had a normal, you know, school life, like, I mean, it's almost asking to mix water and oil, but it just doesn't happen that way. So usually I meet them where they're at and we start from scratch. And it's constant reassurance. Like, I mean, we're going to get there. And it's not something that's going to happen overnight. Like we're constantly working on ourselves. We're constantly working on our mental health, not just from a child or young adult perspective, but our entire lives. Mm-hmm. And I know earlier I said some adults, they don't necessarily master specific emotions. And that's not necessarily true, because we're always learning in depth. Like you may see frustration and you may be at a level 1 at frustration, but you're gonna experience so many different depths of that. And that's how it is with children. Like we could be 18 years old, we can start from scratch, but we will get there.
Do you support, like, because some people, and I've done this too, like you just bottle stuff up, right? And do you practically, like, what are some things that, like, when somebody's just dealing with all of those emotions, even a child or an adult, like, I mean, you know, punch pillows, go into a closet and scream, like just simple things like that to get that energy out, you know, that release. Because in your professional opinion, what happens when we just pack it down and swallow that grief? Baxter, and because that's the question for Brianna, but Baxter, like, can I ask you that personal question? Have you felt like you've had to do that, like pack it down and just swallow if these emotions come up? And you don't have to answer, but I think it might be helpful for somebody.
Yeah, most definitely. Packing down these emotions, ideas, and different mentalities can have an actual physical impact on your body. Like, you know, like your emotions can make you cry. So that's a physical manifestation of feeling sad. And so when you compact and keep compacting sad feelings, hurtful feelings, it's like you got a can of soda, you shake it up and it's gonna bust, right? It's gonna go everywhere. So that pressure is eventually gonna have to be released. Healthy ways to do those things are, if you like, it's called sublimation. I learned this a long time ago in a health class at Edison High School. What you do is you will like clean up. If you like, you know, whenever you're mad, start cleaning. Do exercise. You can do, you know, start washing dishes, start straightening up your room, start cleaning up things, something that's going to give a positive outcome for you. And so now you've taken that bad energy and you converted it into something that you needed to get done anyway, and it was able to become a positive thing. You wanted to work out, build your health, build your energy, your power base up, your whole cell, your being. Or, you know, whether it's, you know, I won't necessarily say try to work on a project that you have to do, like if you're in school, if you have an assignment, or if you are at work and you have work assignments, but it's something that doesn't take brain power, but takes physical power. The exercise, physically exert yourself and get something done that's positive.
Good. That's really good, really good. But I do want to push, and I want to lean on you a little bit. How do you, and Brianna, you can jump in, anybody, y'all can jump in like this, we're all talking here, but how do you, because remember, I've experienced loss too, so you guys are helping me at the same time. How do you, and Grace, maybe this question is more towards you, how do you find that fine line between like being in service to others and staying busy, the fine line between coping with your grief and escaping?
I think with that, it's, you know, still acknowledging that there is that pain and that feeling of miss. And, you know, I like, for me, you know, I'm in a fortunate spot with like where my grief, you know, I can, you know, shoot a text message off to my husband, you know, I can, you know, we're, you know, nine time zones away from each other, but I can call him and potentially have him call me back. Like, you know, we keep good communication. I think like maintaining that, you know, reality of the situation, and also being open to talking about it while serving others. And, you know, people ask all the time, oh, like, you know, you're here in Tulsa now, like, what do you do? Who, like, oh, you bought a house, like you and your husband,
Right. And then it opens up the door to the whole, you're constantly re-traumatizing yourself in a sense of like having to explain it again. And
Yeah, it gets hard, but I do think that owning it, owning the situation and talking about it, I'm an open book. You know me. Like, we have had lots of conversations. Finally, like this last week, I did, make a post on social media, and I was like, I just need people to stop asking. Like, I need you guys to do that for me, because time of the year, it's rough. I thought my husband was going to be here a couple weeks ago. He's not. We're looking at probably another year before he's here. And it's just like, this is hard. It's hard getting through life. Like, I never thought when I married him and brought a child in the world with him that, I'd be without him for this long. When you marry someone who's not from here, yeah, there's going to be times where you're going to be separated, but you're like, oh, like a month, maybe 2 months, like whatever kind of thing. Like, you don't think it's going to be years. But I think owning it and communicating those feelings is how you keep from like escaping it, rather than, kind of losing yourself in service.
right. And Brianna, I'm sure all this is resonating with you, because this sounds like a lot of the things that you tell the clients that you advocate for. But what could we, in helping our kids, our nieces, our nephews, our students, if we're teachers, just in the community, how can we as adults help the kids that are coming up behind us who are dealing with different challenges? How can we better serve them in helping them? Like, does that make sense? Like, what could I, like, for instance, what could I do as a parent to better serve my child who has dealt with like being out of school for a year and a half and other different challenges, like at the same time dealing with my own, grief of losing my father and different things like that?
Yeah. Before I answer that question, you said something earlier about like coping, like the difference between coping and escaping. Yeah. And I wanted to like kind of clarify that from the work that I do, that perspective. And it's very different, because coping usually, like, whenever someone experiences a traumatic event, which all of you have, and the children that I work with, they typically have experienced some sort of traumatic event, your entire body, biologically, psychologically, it goes through a change. It is not at its norm. And so with coping, you're trying to get your body mentally, physically back to that norm. And with a traumatic event, it's not something that you can just cry away, or eventually it just goes away. Like, you don't think about it anymore. Like, it's something that's always, you're always going to think about that. But when you're coping with something, you're getting back to your norm. Like, you're trying to allow your body, you're working on your body to get back to your norm. But when you're escaping something, you're typically attaching some sort of negative thought and like physical thing to that specific pain. And so those are the differences that I typically see when it comes to coping and escaping something. And I mean, the ways that you can help others and help ones that are close to you, it's really allowing them to feel what they feel and continue to foster in those relationships, like being present and allowing that environment for them to talk about the things that they feel. And sometimes they don't have the words to explain that. And it could look like acting out, or it could look, and I'm not saying like a free pass, or if your kid is being really naughty, like, let them be naughty every day.
Right.
But, create an environment that allows them to express and learn how to express. And you're doing the same thing. I know sometimes women specifically, in certain cultures, just in certain demographics, like, we're supposed to be strong. And this is in men too, in the same aspect. We're supposed to be strong. We're not supposed to cry. Like, we're supposed to do X, Y, and Z. And we're human. You can't escape or ignore when you're hurting. And it's okay to. And it's okay to show our children that as well.
Right. Thank you for that. It goes back to what Grace said when she had to put that boundary up, like setting boundaries and being authentic. I think sometimes we we get caught up in how we're perceived, but it really at the end of the day, like people are going to perceive you how they perceive you. Like it has nothing to do like with you really, but like getting to a space where you feel, you know, you feel good enough within yourself to be able to like, look, hey, please, no more questions, or to your child or the parent, you know, setting those boundaries, like, look, let's figure this out, but basically like, no, we're not doing this today. You know, like I think that's a great, that was very good, Brianna. Thank you for that. Do you guys think that going forward, like we're almost to 2022 and we don't know what's going to happen, like literally a tornado dropped, like collectively as a nation, as a country, or as a being in a global community that we're in, like we're going through a lot of loss and grief. Like when people experience loss and it's, you know, projected back to you through media images and stuff, like you have to not be human to, you know, to feel that. Like, you know, when you talk about mass shootings, as a mother, of course, like I had to like force myself to not cry. You know, we're living in this world where I might have a daughter that goes to high school every day, you know, and then for some reason these kids think it's funny to make jokes about school shootings or whatever. But as a parent, you're like, you never think that you're that parent that's going to get that phone call, or that you see your kid and that's the last time you see them because they're going to school. And so like, throw that in the mix, throw in the mix of tornadoes just dropping down out of nowhere and wiping out whole communities, you know, right before Christmas. So collectively, and each one of you can answer with this, and I'll start with Baxter and then Brianna and then Grace. Collectively, what are you guys doing? And Brianna, you can tell us from your professional point of view what you think we should be doing. But like Baxter, Grace, Brianna, what are you doing to like basically protect your peace from dealing with your own personal loss and then compounded by loss that other people, you know, other human beings are feeling that you can empathize with? So Baxter, how do you protect your peace in that while maintaining your empathy?
While maintaining the empathy, coming from an understanding that you can only control yourself, like ultimately, even as a parent, you only can really control yourself. You can't control what your child does. You can't, like when they're not in your presence and when they grow up and they're 15, 16 years old and moving on and they steal something from the store or whatever the case may be. You didn't raise them to do that, but they're doing bad things. And hopefully they listen to the teachings and it, you know, recollect in their minds, hey, my parents told me not to do this or this situation. And so understanding that if I do the best that I can with all the power that I have within me, and I give to people the best of me and show them, and hopefully I can influence them so that they can give the best of themselves. You know, natural disasters, I think that we all collectively just, you know, pray to whoever we pray to or believe in and hope that the families can move forward, you know, with those, because you have natural disasters, you have terrorist attacks, you have all types of things that are completely out of control of any of us. And so we have nothing but total empathy for those situations. There's nothing that can be done, you know, once it hit that level. And so all the preventative measures did not work. And we just try to wrap our arms around those loved ones that are still there and show the humanity that we understand loss. We've grieved before. We understand that you're grieving now. We know how it feels. And so we'll be there for you. We need a great display of that is when somebody dies and it's to a family that's, how would you say, they're a pauper or they're low income and they have to put like a GoFundMe up just to bury their loved one. And people from all over starts just sending whatever they can. And, you know, it's not really the the best light that that family wanted to represent themselves, but it's all that they knew how to do or could do. And people from all over would show massive amounts of love and help them to give their loved one a proper burial. And so I think that that's our best ways to show empathy for those type of situations, to understand that you can only control so much, and what you can't control, be there to show love.
That's good. Grace, when you're
Yeah.
dealing with your online community and you're hearing all these sad stories, like how do you not internalize those but still maintain your empathy and not let it, cause you to further you know what I mean? Like start spiraling down. What do you do?
Yeah, I think it's really important, like, especially for me, like with my online community, we all have something about us where we can sympathize with one another, but that doesn't mean that I can empathize or I can empathize with them, but I can't always sympathize with their exact situation.
Okay.
But I can through my empathy and understanding, these cultural differences and seeing how it affects my relationship with my husband, things that you don't even think about, weird things throughout the day of being married to someone from a completely different culture. And then understanding things that are acceptable in that culture that are just kind of, blow your mind to people who are outside of that community. Just really trying to learn and be someone who people can talk to about it. Like, my girls know that they can come to me and talk to me about anything. Like most of them feel comfortable doing that. I think, like last summer when all of the Black Lives Matter and George Floyd and all that was going on, I cannot understand the trauma that, my friends in like the Black and brown community went through residual, that from being a Black or brown person, I can understand that trauma. But trying to, be intentional and asking questions and seeking out people, you and Baxter and other people in Tulsa have been really great resources for me to say, I want to understand your perspective. And I think it's important for us to explore different perspectives that are different from ours so that we can be the most empathetic individuals to these situations. And it's like being open and humble to say, I don't know your situation. I don't know, the trauma that you and your community are feeling, but I want to understand it as much as I possibly can. And finding people who will allow those conversations without necessarily turning hostile, because there can also be that fine line of, this is my story,
Right.
I get that sometimes when people try to stomp over what I'm going through, and it's like, please don't try to compare, your husband who, who's in the National Guard and has to go do his stuff 1 week in a month. That is not the same as my husband. Like,
Thank you.
I've had people do that. Oh my gosh, I totally understand. I'm like, you
don't.
Like, you don't understand, but that doesn't mean that your situation is hard, like, or isn't hard.
Isn't
like,
hard, right?
Right. Like we all deal with things differently. And I think it's just trying to educate yourself and be the best person for yourself and for your community is really where good empathy plays in.
That's good. And Miss Brianna, you're going to have the last word on that.
I think, from a professional standpoint, I guess the way that I separate myself and the way that I encourage others to separate themselves is to know that everybody will have their time to grieve about something at whatever degree that is. And right now it is that other person's time to grieve. And while it may be a situation we don't necessarily understand, it may be a situation that, that doesn't make sense to us. And sometimes it does, but I think both Baxter and Grace touch bases on doing what you can and making that very clear helping others in the ways that you can, not, overextending or trying to make yourself understand something, or trying to feel like you can prevent something that's inevitable, like a natural disaster. Like you're doing what you can, whether that be, offering a phone call to Grace, or whether that be like donating money to these different GoFundMe's. Like we're all trying to do what we can in this sense. And I think that's something that, everybody else can utilize in their home, doing what you can when you are experiencing grief and when you are around others that may be experiencing grief.
That was awesome. Wow. Again, it kind of goes back to service to others. That really helps us to start healing our own situations. I really want to thank, our time is up. I want to thank our panelists, Brianna Brown, Grace Harrington, and the name that shall not be named except last name Baxter, for joining us today in this important conversation, and also our appreciation to the folks that make Real Talk possible. Tri-City Collective, the Woody Guthrie Center, Folk Alliance International, Tulsa Artist Fellowship, and the Black Wall Street Times. And thank you to all that joined us live today. Join us again next month. Real Talk is live every third Saturday. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.